Time for some rogue builds. Roll it. And we are back with a second rogue build of the series, and this build will be slightly different with some different gear choices. Also, there will be no Band of Air in this one because let's just be honest, most of the player base does not have the Band of Air, and most probably don't even try to farm it due to the ridiculously bad RNG therein. So, let's put a build out there that can actually be used by most players. If you have seen my first build video of this series, then you will notice the changes to this one. So if you haven't, I think you should go take a quick look at the previous build video I uploaded. And don't worry, that won't take you too long. I added timestamps for your convenience. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 8,000 subs, which isn't much, but every sub counts. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into it. First off, these builds will be endgame focused, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be a goal for newer players to try to achieve, and they can also get a sense of direction when it comes to what they might need to be a badass little McStabby McStabberson. So, how is this going to work? First, I'll explain what stat caps need to be achieved as a rogue. I know most of you already know this, but some new players might not, so I will do it anyways just for them. Then I will show you my race choices, followed by my ability stat choices both in the character creation screen and the in-game character sheet. Then we'll go to the Paragon path chosen and why. Then I will show you all the gear choices made for this build, which will include the main gear, enchantment choices, weapon choices, modifications, armor reinforcements, artifact choices, companion choices, both summoned and utility, along with the companion gear used in this build. Also the mount equip power and combat power I have chosen. Of course, also what collars are being used, the insignia bonuses, and what type of insignias are being used individually. Then I will go to feats, boons, and the power trade choices. And you will also see at the beginning of the video the consumables I will be using because they are important to all builds when it comes to capping the stats you need. However, after I have shown you all the choices, then I will explain why every choice was made, along with a ranking system I have created to rank each piece of gear accordingly. This is what the ranking system will look like. On the top of the screen will be the ranking system itself, which will be insane, amazing, great, good, average, or shitty. And below is what I will be ranking. The item level, the combined rating, the bonus of each thing if there is any, the cost if any, the RNG if any, accessibility, and replaceability. And at the very bottom where it can be found or grinded for. And obviously the name of the gear or the item in question will be on this image as well. This is just an example so you know what to expect moving forward. Then obviously I will show you the stat caps achieved using the target dummies. Then after the build is shown and explained in its entirety, I will then show you some alternative gear choices you can use in case you don't have any specific piece of gear or are not comfortable with some of these choices I have made. Keep in mind some of the gear choices made are irreplaceable for this build to work, but the ones that can afford to be changed will be changed. And of course, I'm not covering every gear choice in the game, that would be crazy. And that will be basically it. And the format used in this video will be applied to the other build videos in this series as well, which I said was pick your poison. So after that long-winded but much needed explanation, let's begin.
Cannot win this battle unless we have an advantage in artillery.
Swing those hammers, slugs! We've orders to fill! No slacking now! You can be replaced! Valindra ends here. I swear it.
succeed in our mission, we must stop the production of undead, prevent the animation of the dead dragon Lorogoth, and slay Valindra.
So before I begin explaining each build choice, let's talk about stat caps. As a rogue, your main focus should be power first, as it increases your damage and it's the most important stat. Second, you should focus on combat advantage, since it also increases your damage when you're flanking your enemies. Then focus on crit strike and crit severity, since they go hand in hand. Crit strike increases the amount of crit strikes you land, and crit severity increases the damage done by said crit strikes. And lastly, accuracy is your so-called dump stat, which reduces your enemy's ability to deflect your attacks. People call it a dump stat, but that doesn't mean it's useless. I think it's underrated in general, and it does increase your damage regardless. As far as defensive stats go, focus on defense. Awareness is also very good, but there aren't enough sources in the game to elevate the awareness stat naturally like defense does. So as long as you focus on these stats, you will be increasing your damage. The goal is obviously to cap them all at 90% if possible, or as close to 90% as possible. Capping at least 4 of the offensive is what you should strive for anyways. Race choice. As far as races go, there are no super huge differences no matter what choice you make, but they do have some benefits depending on the class or what you need most stats wise. For the rogues, there are 3 main DPS races that I prefer: the normal Dragonborn or the Metallic, which I consider one race, the Gith, and the Wood Elf. The Dragonborn grants you 3% power and 3% crit strike, which obviously both work towards capping those 2 specific stats. The Gith grants us 5% combat advantage and the Wood Elf 5% to crit strike. I personally prefer the Dragonborn or the Gith, but for this build I am using the Metallic Dragonborn. Reason is simple: you get 1 extra percent total to your stats, 6% as opposed to 5%, but if your build suffers from combat advantage, then use Gith, or the Wood Elf if you lack crit strike. The race itself doesn't grant you more damage. The stat bonuses, however, can help you cap your stats, which in turn will help you deal more damage. Does that make sense? Good. For the ability stats and the character creation as a Dragonborn, choose Strength and Charisma. You can also choose Dexterity instead of Charisma, but since Dexterity increases crit severity and crit severity is very easy to cap with consumables in-game, we choose Charisma for the recharge speed instead. Same reasoning applies for your in-game ability stats. Put all your points into Strength and Charisma. The Paragon path I chose is obvious. I chose Assassin. Assassin is better overall in both single target and AoE damage. Despite what some Whisper Knife players might be trying to tell you, the only place where Whisper Knife can compete with Assassin is during mob phases, and even then a decent Assassin can still out damage a Whisper Knife. And trust me, I've run with tons of endgame Whisper Knives. Whisper Knife in general needs a bit more love, but until then, Assassin is the go-to choice overall. Sorry Whisper Knives, it's just the way it is. Now, it's time to get to the good stuff. Gear choices. For the helm, we have chosen the Garistro's Horns. The obvious reason for this choice is for the equip bonus this helm provides us. You can gain up to 10% critical strike at max stacks, and there is no other helm that provides such a huge boost to our crit percentage, so this helm is critical. See what I did there? For this specific build and for capping crit strike. Garistro Horns have a great item level and the combined rating is also pretty good. The cost of making the lure to get the horns isn't very high or very grindy, but it can get a bit expensive depending on how unkind RNG can be and how many lures you'll need until the horn drops for you. Overall, the usual drop rate is around 1 horn per 10 to 15 hunts on average, so its RNG seems to be halfway decent, especially compared to other gear pieces in the game. In general, the Gristro Horns are fairly easy to obtain considering its endgame gear at the moment. All you have to do is go do the tier 1 Whitehorn hunt in the scab area located in Avernus. Next is the armor choice. For the armor, there is only one choice, and it is sadly irreplaceable and has been since Avernus was released. And that armor piece is called the Bone Devil's Ribcage. This armor piece is leaps and bounds better than any other armor piece in the game. There is no alternative to what it provides you. The item level is decent and so is the combined rating, but the equip bonus is beyond bonkers. At max stats, you can get up to 12.5% crit strike and 12.5% crit severity at once, so 25% to those specific stats. That's huge amounts of percentage stats being applied to your character. And while the ribcage is insanely good, it also has a very shitty RNG and very shitty accessibility. and the cost of the lure is crazy too. There is no easy way to grind the lure. It takes time and effort, and if you wanted to buy the lure, it varies between 5 million astral diamonds and 8 million, and obviously those are PC prices. And even that price can sometimes go higher. And there's also no guarantee when you buy the lure that the ribcage will drop for you. On average, for most players, it's between 5 and 10 lures. Some unlucky folks have actually used way more than 5 lures, so imagine the cost of just 5 lures and no ribcage to drop, let alone more. Yeah, beyond ridiculous. The ribcage can be found by doing the tier 3 hunt in Avernus called Night Spine, and just like the Greastor Horns, the ribcage also is irreplaceable for this specific build to work. Next, we have the arm piece.
How dare you interrupt me? Slave!
Here, I have chosen the wrist guards of precipitation. The item level is super high and so is the combined rating, but the true power of these arms is in the equip bonus. At max stacks, you get 7,500 power. The power fluctuates in battle, but for the most part you have max stacks all the time during combat. These types of gloves used to be useless in previous mods because power was extremely easy to cap, but ever since Dragonbone Veil was released, our item level has jumped from the low 60,000s to the high 70s and low 80s, and we don't have enough power to compensate for such a huge item level difference. So these gloves are beyond perfect for helping you cap at the moment. Getting the wrist guards is not that hard accessibility wise. All you have to do is be able to join Vault of Stars, and then just do the first mini boss over and over until they drop for you. The drop rate is quite decent. The only problem is that mini bosses drop tons of different gear pieces, so it can take a while sometimes to get what you want to drop, but you can spam the mini boss very quickly over and over and over again, so it doesn't seem as bad. There are actually people who form groups to do this sort of farm. These arms can be replaced by other power gloves, but I wouldn't recommend it for this build. You can find these gloves, like I said, at the first mini boss in the hardcore Vault of Stars dungeon. Next, we have the Mirage weapons.
Mortals, embrace their skull!
I chose the Mirage because for some, Lionheart might be too expensive or too much of a grind. Plus the Mirage are not that far behind the Lionhearts damage-wise. They're not as good in AoE, but still good enough to do the job regardless. A worthy replacement. Mirage has a very low item level and combined rating, but the accessibility is great since you can buy them from the auction house or grind for them in the Cloaked Ascendancy campaign. And their cost isn't that expensive either, around 1 million per weapon. And trust me, we've seen worse. And of course they are replaceable by either the Lionhearts or the Mastercraft weapons. So go grind these out or buy them if you haven't. Next we have the Primal Raid Butisi.
Cannot win this battle unless we have an advantage in our...
They have a very low item level and combined rating, but they have an equip bonus that more than makes up for it. The equip bonus is when you kill an enemy, you gain 3% action points. So for example, if you kill 5 mobs, that's 15% action point gain. If you kill 10 mobs, it's 30%. And in mob phases as rogues, we generally kill a lot. In parties, we're mostly the ones getting the most kills overall when it comes to mobs. So if you're capping your combat advantage or close to it, the primal boots are super beneficial as they help you spam your dailies more often. And our dailies, especially Whirlwind of Blades, gives us up to 15% damage, and that's not including the 5% from Invisible Infiltrator. So more dailies equals more overall damage. There are some doubters when it comes to these boots, but I don't care. I have seen the difference, I have tried and tested the difference, and I'm sticking to it as it significantly increased my damage output in AoE situations with ton of mobs around me. And you have nothing to lose using them if your combat advantage is already capped, so I don't see the issue. The cost is also super low at 2,500 Chultan Riches in the Chult campaign store. However, even though they are my first choice, they are not irreplaceable. The Wasteland Wanderers and the Rusted Iron Leggings are also very good. I just think primals are better, especially if you're capping, and they definitely work wonders for my build. Next we have the Artifact set, which contains the neck belt and main artifact. They are the Mythallar Shard, the Mythallar Piece, and the Mythallar Fragment. This artifact set has a very high item level and combined rating. But the bonus is what makes this set so potent, as it does an additional hit worth 100 magnitude damage when you deal combat advantage damage. And for us rogues, that's almost always. The set is particularly good if you have the Band of Air, as it helps you proc it more often. Keep that in mind, since without the Band of Air, the demo set might be a slightly better choice, but not by much. There are so many pros to this set. It costs nothing to get and there's no RNG to it since it's free by going through the Dragonbone Veil campaign. So its accessibility is very high, but it is replaceable, depending on what you have or what you are using ring-wise. The demo set is the next best thing if you haven't got the Mythallar set yet, which would be weird since it's so easy to obtain through the campaign. And like I said, the demo set is slightly better in my opinion if you're not using the Band of Air, but the difference is minimal, so it doesn't matter. Next we move to our 2 ring choices, and the Red Eyes Glare is our first choice of the 2.
Swing those hammers, slugs!
This ring is amazing all around. It has a high item level and a decent combined rating. The stat bonus of 4,500 crit severity is extremely good to help you cap your stats, but what makes this ring awesome is the 7.5% stats it grants you in total. 5% to power, which is the best stat to focus on, and 2.5% accuracy to go along with it. The ring is a must-have to help you cap your power, especially since the release of Dragonbone Veil. For me, the ring is irreplaceable, but it doesn't mean you can't figure out power without it. It just makes life a lot harder if you're not using this ring. The ring does have a downside. The RNG is horrible. Granted, not for everybody, but for most people. It can take one run to get it, or hundreds. I know people to this day that have done over 500 plus or more runs and still haven't had it drop. That's absolutely crazy. I have personally done over 3,000 Vault of Stars runs, and I'm still missing one ring from the collection, believe it or not. The accessibility is quite decent if you could just at least queue for the Vault of Stars, and then you have a chance to get the ring if you can actually complete it. So personally, I love the ring, and I don't remove it. Next, we have the Queen's Golden Opal Ring.
No slacking now!
This is our replacement for the Band of Air, which I said earlier isn't part of this build, because not everybody has the Band of Air, so it would make no sense. The Queen's Golden Opal is a worthy replacement because your melee powers deal 3% more damage. The damage output isn't as high as the Band of Air, but it is great nonetheless. The item level is high and the combined rating is not too shabby either. You also get some hefty stats like over 1k combat advantage and over 3,000 crit strike, which makes this ring very well balanced. The problem, however, comes down to the RNG. The RNG for this ring is very random and low for most people. Some get it quick and others get it in hundreds of runs. Just pray to the gods and you might just get it. Accessibility is good but not great, since it can only be obtained by completing the Vault of Stars through the chest rewards. However, they do have a decent replaceability with other damage rings or the Band of Air. So go grind out the Vault of Stars if you are missing this ring. Next, we have the shirt. For this build, I have chosen the Veiled Tunic, which takes on the role of helping deal more damage rather than capping stats, even though it does give you over 1,000 combat advantage and 1,000 crit severity, which does contribute to capping. The Veiled Tunic is a very high item level for a shirt at 1,400. The combined rating is also very good, but the bonus is what makes this shirt great. You can deal up to 5% extra damage as long as you keep it moving, which makes sense during AoE battles because you are constantly moving almost all the time. The accessibility of this shirt is amazing because it's free through the Dragonbone Veil campaign, but it can be replaced by a variety of other shirts depending on your needs, so by no means is this shirt irreplaceable. But as far as dealing damage goes, this shirt is really good if you know how to stack it properly. Now let's look at the pants.
Valentra ends here. I swear it.
Here I have chosen the Velvet +1 pants. They have a decent item level and combined rating, and the bonus is one of the good ones, gaining 25 action points per critical strike. But I mostly picked these pants for a filler for its offensive stats, since not many pants out there have double offensive stats. These are also very cheap. You can get them around 10,000 Astral Diamonds on PC in the auction house, or they can actually be crafted. There are replacements for this with higher item level or different stats, so I wouldn't worry too much about the pants. I just chose them for the offensive. And last, we have the rest of the artifact choices for the last 3 spots available. And here we will have none other than the Storyteller's Journals. They all have very low item level individually and combined rating, but there's nothing we can do about that. I use the Envenom Journal as my summon for the AP gain and the stun. That's why actually some people call it Stun Book instead of a journal. And then we have the Frozen Journal and the Flayed Journal as the other 2 to complete the 3 empty artifact slots and to gain the set bonus. This set grants you power, health points, and an extra hit to weapon damage every time you crit. It increases your overall attributes by 1, and you have a chance to deal additional unresistible damage equal to 10% of your weapon damage. And that's not including the pages you can add to the journals as well, like increased damage by 5%, AP gains, and stuns. It's overall the best trio artifact set in the game, but it's a bit expensive at around 2.5 million per artifact in the auction house on PC at the moment. There are some replacements to this, but not nearly as powerful and not for this build, because this build relies on that set to help proc the Band of Air and for the damage the set provides. You can find the artifacts or the packs for them in the auction house and occasionally in the Zen store every so often, until of course they're not there ever again. But for now, we use the journals. And before I forget, let's talk about the armor reinforcements. I personally use critical strike on all armor pieces, so that's the head, chest, arms, and boots. And I use the combat advantage reinforcements on my neck, rings, and belt. Each one grants you 880 stats each if you get the +1s, and have a very low item level of 44 each. The armor reinforcements are replaceable with any stats you need, so you can mix and match or just use power, or crit, or accuracy, or whatever you need. But personally, like I said, for the reinforcements on the neck, I personally go combat advantage, but you can actually use stamina gain if you cap your CA and don't need it. Basically, it's your choice. This is just what I go for in this build. Now that the gear is out of the way and you have an understanding of why each choice was made, let's move on to the enchantment choices. For all the offensive enchantment slots, I chose Jade for the crit strike, and in the defensive slots, I chose Garnet for the defense. The item level and combined rating on enchantments at max level are really high. 4 Jades on the offensive slots grant me a total of 10,000 crit strike, and the 4 on the defensive side grant me 10,000 defense. Obviously, you can mix and match here and choose what other enchantments you need. I prefer Jade and Garnet to make this build work. For utility, I have chosen Garnet again for the 2,250 Forte, which helps push my stats towards being capped. Sadly, getting these to Mythic from Blue is very expensive, and so is buying them from the auction house. They are around 5 to 6 million Astro Diamonds at Mythic in the auction house right now. They are all replaceable depending on what stats you need, so just because I use Jade doesn't mean you have to, but it would help you cap if you're trying to follow or copy this build. For bonus enchantments, I use the 50% movement speed, which is insanely good since being slow sucks. And I don't think the recharge speed bonus enchantment is good enough because it only gives you 5% recharge speed. The only time I would consider recharge speed if it was like 15%, just like the speed is. The bonus enchantment generally has no item level or combined rating for some random reason, but it is expensive to create or buy just like the other enchantments are. So like I said, you can replace the movement speed with recharge speed, but I wouldn't do that since movement speed is much more beneficial when it's 15% versus 5% recharge speed. And as a rogue, we want to be fast as as possible. Then last we have the weapon enchantment choice. Here of course we chose the Poison Thorn, which is the old Bile Thorn, and at the moment it does the most damage, and stacking those DOTs is always fun. It has a crazy high item level of 5,000 but no combined rating at all, and is for some reason cheaper than normal enchantments at around 2.5 million on PC. You can replace this with something else, but you'll do less damage if you do. So for DPS, Poison Thorns is definitely the go-to, so I'd stick with that. And as far as overloads go, I use the Precision for the 5% accuracy and 5% crit strike. And you can also use Rage of Flames for 5% extra damage, or the Black Ice Overload for the stats and the AP gain. Next, let's go to the companion choices, both summon and utility, and of course the companion gear. My summoned companion is of course the Owlbear Cub because of the massive amount of stats it provides to crit severity, combat advantage, and accuracy. My companion gear is glistening because of the huge amounts of singular stats it provides to the preferred stats I have chosen. I use the glistening sword knot for 1950 accuracy, the glistening icon for 1950 crit chance, and the glistening grimoire for 1950 combat advantage. I also use acute senses for the 7.5 combat advantage, the face baiter for the 3.8% crit chance and combat advantage. And I also use the Neverwinter Knight for the 7.5% outgoing damage. And as you probably already noticed, this build doesn't use the Minsk at all, since the Minsk is far more useful during boss fights, so I preferred some extra stats in its place. Moving on, I use the Alchemist for crit chance and combat advantage, and I also use the duo of Drist and Wolfgar. The Wolfgar provides 4.7 combat advantage and accuracy, while Drist provides 4.7 crit severity and crit chance. Keep in mind you need to use both of these at once to keep the full benefit and reach 4.7% stats instead of 3.8. If you remove one companion or the other, the percentage drops to 3.8. Also, the Faceplater and the Alchemist are not that expensive. The Neverwinter Knight is free from the Echoes of Prophecy, but the Wolfgar and Drist are very expensive, anywhere between 6 to 8 million each, while the Owlbear Cub is around 2 to 3 million at in the auction house. Keep in mind these are all PC prices. Let's move on to mounts. My insignia bonuses of choice are 1 Artificer's Persuasion, 2 Assassin's Covenants, and 2 Gladiator Guiles. Sadly, there are not many insignia bonuses worth our while, so I use 2 Covenants for the extra stats. Granted, the second Assassin's gives me only half of what the first one does, but that's more than enough to help with capping. I also use 2 Gladiator's Guiles for more run speed and 1 Persuasion for the 2-second reduced cooldown when I use an artifact, which isn't much, but it's better than nothing. The actual insignias are all power and forte, except for the enlightened insignias. They are forte and crit severity. So as you can see, the main focus is power and forte, with a little bit of crit severity sprinkled in there. Collars, I use the crit severity collar for 5% crit severity at Mythic, the encounter collar for 5% more damage when I use said encounters, and it's better than the at will collar because the at will collar only affects the at will and its bleeds. The encounter collar, however, helps stack up toxic blades more than the at will, thus giving us more damage. Then I use the Astral Diamonds collar, which is only useful for item level combined rating and upping damage due to said item level and combined rating. Since getting 10% more Astral Diamonds from the collar does nothing for my character's overall damage, I also use the 5% stamina collar and the 5% movement speed collar. Reasons are obvious. For boons, I'll just show you them and you can copy or see which ones I'm using for yourself, since it would take forever to mention them all. One thing I do want to mention though is that I don't use any boons which increase my overall health points. The reason behind this choice is the more health you have, the harder it is to proc the Ribcage and Garistor's horns. Not that it's super hard to begin with, it just makes it easier to keep those stacks up for longer if you don't have to put more effort into it. And my survivability is just fine at around 900k without it, so it doesn't really matter. So I just allocated those boons into like types of monster damage like cultists or whatever else. But feel free to use health boons if you have issues with survivability. And for guild boons, I use the crit strike and defense. The other two don't matter, like mount speed and PvP boons. They don't matter at all. And lastly, let's go to powers. For AoE, main daily is Whirlwind of Blades, since hitting 5 targets with it grants us up to 15% more damage, so that's 3% from each mob because you have a max of 5 mobs you can hit. Class encounters are the Path of Blade, Smoke Bomb, and Blade Flurry. At wills, I use Duelist Flurry and Gloaming Cut. But you do want to focus more on using Gloaming Cut on mob phases since it hits harder and you gain more AP. And for class features, I use Oppressive Darkness mostly, or some Skillful Infiltrator for more speed depending on the situation. But Oppressive Darkness does grant you more damage than Skillful Infiltrator. And I use Invisible Infiltrator for the 5% more damage and Stealth Refill after using a daily. And I also use the Awakened Forges box on my power tray and sometimes the Neverwinter Hawk for some extra damage, but the Forges box is more than adequate. And before I forget, for feats I use Toxic Blades, Master of Shadows, Duelist Expertise, Back Alley Tactics, and Execution.
Impressive! You will make excellent undead bodyguards!
To succeed in our mission, we must stop the production of undead, prevent the animation of the dead dragon Loragoth, and slay Valindra.